Right. Recently, I came across an article on Substack called "The Problem When AFCON Becomes a Meme." It's by Hayat or Hayat. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But anyway, I'll put that article in the descriptions. Now, whilst reading that article, some points came to me. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, one of the first points that came to mind is why doesn't African football get the respect that other major tournaments do, like say such as the World Cup or Euros or Cup America or the Asia Cup? Like, why doesn't African football get that respect? Okay, I get that most AFCON tournaments are held during the European club season, which creates headaches for European clubs, as it means they're missing out on their players. But that shouldn't mean that African football should get less respect. Also, maybe another reason why African football doesn't get such respect is that players will choose African to play for their African nations as a second option rather than a first option. And this reminds me of something that Mikel John Obi said a short while ago. I think it was sometime around last year. He said that players choosing to play for their African nations rather than adopted European nation, it should be their first option rather than, say, a last resort when their European nation doesn't pick them. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why African football doesn't get such respect, but that's just my 2 cents on that. But what are your thoughts so far? Another thing is that I've heard some sectors of society say that African football is at a lower level. I'm sorry, no, it's not. African football is at a great level. Like, African football is the same as the Euros or Cup America or Asia Cup. Like, winning AFCON is at the same level as winning the Euros or Cup America or Asia Cup. Like, it's the same level. Like, and for those of you saying that it's not, it is. Like, just because it's Africa doesn't mean it's less. And another thing that came to mind is that is this, like, African footballers are celebrated when they're playing for their clubs, but for some reason when when they're playing for their international teams at the Africa Cup of Nations, it's like, oh no, that's not allowed to happen. It's like it's implied that Africans can only play football when they're playing for their clubs. And the Asane Diao situation comes to mind. This was mentioned in the article where Cesc Fabregas blocked him from playing for Senegal because he might pick up an injury, but he picked up an injury for his club side anyway. So that whole situation doesn't really make sense to me. Like, managers should not be blocking African players for playing for their international sides. Also, African football isn't a nuisance. Okay, like I said earlier, it may be played during the European club season, but there's a reason as to why AFCON is being played around this time rather than, say, June, July. Like, African football, like, okay, I'm saying African football a lot, but what I should say is AFCON. Like, AFCON cannot be played in June, July all the time, as that'll block certain countries from hosting the tournament, as as the climate just doesn't suit for that tournament to be played. Like, I recall watching the under 17 World Cup when it was held in Nigeria back in '09. Okay, I didn't go to Nigeria, but I was fortunate enough to watch some of the games thanks to Eurosports, which no longer exist as a channel anyway. And one feature I recall is that it rained a lot, and I think that tournament was being held during spring. Yeah, it was a season where it rained a lot. So using that as an example, like there is a reason why AFCON is played during the European club season. So as to avoid a situation where matches are being called off left, right, and centre because of rain. And when I tell you in Africa, when it rains, it's not like rain here. In Africa, when it rains, it pours. So that's one of the reasons why AFCON can't be played in June, July always. Like I just said it'll block like certain countries from hosting that tournament, and it's one of the reasons why AFCON is being held during the European club season. Like, it was the same for previous tournaments as well, excluding the 2019 tournament, which was held in June and July. Another thing, African football doesn't have to bow to European pressure. Like, okay, I get that Europe wants African football. I keep saying African football, I should be saying AFCON. Okay, I'll say AFCON from now on. I get that Europe wants AFCON to be held at a later date, so as to keep their players for their club sides. But African football has or can have its own backbone. Like, if Europe wants to be like, oh, okay, the Africa Cup of Nations should be held at a later date, then African football should be like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to host it when we want to host it, and you can't have a say about it. Like, I really don't get that. Like, my previous point saying that, like, Europe likes African players until it's time for African players to play for their international teams. I mean, it rings true to a degree. Like, why is it perceived that African players aren't allowed to play for their international teams? It really does boggle the mind, and this doesn't happen anywhere else. It doesn't happen in Oceania, doesn't happen in South America, doesn't happen in Asia, doesn't happen in North America. Like, the only time it actually happens is when AFCON is on. Like, everyone's saying, like, oh, why is this happening during the club season? Why are African players playing for international teams? This only happens in Africa. Why? Honestly, that is something I can't get my head around, honestly. Final thoughts. African football is here to stay. It is not going anywhere. But yeah, I think I've said enough now. So, what are your thoughts on the points I've just raised? Okay, one more thing. One thing that I found interesting that the article alluded to was when people make fun out of something that happens in African football, but the same thing happens anywhere else. For instance, let's say a player makes a mistake, or a goalkeeper makes a howler, the joke would be like, oh, this happens in African football. But the same mistake happens in European football. Like, people will say, will watch a mistake happen in African football and be like, this is African football. So, African football, the whole of African football is to blame for that one mistake. Yet, in European or South American football, when that same mistake is being made, it's the fault of that specific player. Why? Why do people like to put down African football? I just don't get it. Honestly, I really don't get it.